Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for Tribal Engagement, Distinguishing Consultation from Coordination. This is part 3 in our 3-part Tribal Consultation series. My name is Kara. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program coordinator at Partnership for the National Trail System. I'll be serving as today's webinar moderator. Sorry about that. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Onondaga and Haudenosaunee people. PNTS recognizes that land acknowledgements are an important first step in acknowledging that we are on stolen Indigenous lands. There will be a link in the chat where you can explore what native lands you currently reside on. Please enter into the chat what lands you're joining us from and let us know what organization you're affiliated with. PNTS recognizes the need to commit further to engage in meaningful partnerships. PNTS is committed to working with Indigenous people, organizations, and communities, and having Indigenous people lead the way through initiatives such as this Tribal Consultation series. Our commitment proceeds into the future through projects such as our Indigenous Mapping and Research Project, which provides resources to help advance National Trail System awareness and education of Indigenous knowledge and stewardship. The webinar today is being recorded and will be available to everyone that registered following the live presentation. Today's session will go for about 90 minutes and we will have time at the end for questions and discussion. As we go, please put any questions or comments you have into the chat. For those of you who may not be familiar with Partnership for the National Trail System, or PNTS, we are a small nonprofit that is a collective voice, a resource provider, and a hub for exchange, learning, and action for the National Trail System. As the only 501c3 nonprofit focused on the 30 national scenic and historic trails, PNTS brings together professionals, leaders, and trail and hiking enthusiasts to promote a thriving, accessible, and inclusive National Trail System. On behalf of PNTS, I want to thank the National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, and U.S. Forest Service for their leadership in developing this Tribal Consultation webinar series. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. We have Melissa Twaroski, the coordinator, Trail of Tears MOA implementation with the U.S. Forest Service. We have Amanda Grace Santos, a cultural resource assistant with the U.S. Forest Service. Sheila Bird, the principal consultant at Kituwah Nighthawk Consulting. And we have Bruce Rettig, the tribal content developer with the American Indian Alaska Native Tours Association. Sandra Brusher McFarland, the trail administrator of Nez Perce National Historic Trail, was going to be here today, but due to unforeseen circumstances, she was unable to join us, but I still want to recognize her here because she was an important part of putting today's presentation together. So with that, I will hand it off to Melissa with the U.S. Forest Service to get us started.
Thank you, Kara. Welcome, everyone. My name is Melissa Tvorski. I am currently sitting in a role as coordinating implementation of a Section 106 Memorandum of Agreement that's under the National Historic Preservation Act regarding the Trail of Tears and some damage that our agency caused to a section of that trail on the Cherokee National Forest in 2015. I am currently coming to you from my home in Atlanta, Georgia, on lands that were ceded by the Muskogee Creek or the Creek Nation in 1821 under the what became known as the First Treaty of Indian Springs. So welcome. I've been asked to give you like a brief definition of consultation. And first, you all need to know that consultation, tribal consultation, is a government-to-government function. This is a meeting process that happens between a federal agency, the federal government, and federally recognized tribes. Although I think sometimes in the West, there may be other tribes that are involved, but particularly in the East, we are very specific about focusing with federally recognized tribes. Again, that is a government-to-government relationship, a dialogue that happens with our agency leaders and leadership. I I primarily just provide support for that effort. Most of the activities where the Forest Service ends up doing a lot of consultation is between the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. They tend to be our primary consultation partners. And then our Forest Service leaders or line officers. So that would be a forest supervisor or regional forester level, or even the chief of the Forest Service. Let's see. That in doing tribal consultation, we always establish or work together with the tribe to create an agenda for that particular meeting. Often, like I said, oftentimes it's with the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. They're sort of considered the equivalent to our regional forester or even our agency head, chief of the Forest Service. When you get into the tribal leadership, when you start talking about elected leaders and officials for a tribe, you're starting to think about equivalency. You're starting to talk about equivalency with the President of the United States and Congress. So occasionally we do have meetings that involve elected leaders from tribes, but just wanting you to know that that's what we do. With the agenda, we work together to create the agenda. Tribal consultation is, again, it's not typically, if anything, open to the public unless the tribe might be amenable to that and involving other partners and persons. It is a government to government relationship. So that's the thing I want to understand. These meetings are held in a facility that in my case, the National Forest and the tribe might work together on where we hold these meetings, whether they might be in a tribal facility, a Forest Service facility, or at a neutral location. And typically most of the things that take place in those consultation meetings are held in confidence. The Forest Service does have several legal authorities that allow us to keep that information in confidence. And we work on those, we actively engage with those authorities regularly. So,
yeah, we unfortunately,
Tara, I believe I had that.
Yeah, we did lose Sheila quickly, but yeah, I think we can transition to Amanda Grace to talk a little bit about what engagement is. Thank you so much for giving us that quick background on what consultation is, just to set the stage for us here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Amanda Grace. I'm speaking from ancestral Kituwah lands, the White Shell water place known now as Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'll be talking about engagement, specifically highlighting the differences it has from consultation. So what is engagement? It's an act of seeking out input from communities, the development of relationships, and improving those relationships to support personal and community goals. Long-winded, sure, but brevity is not the soul of wit when it comes to engagement. It takes time and patience. Unlike consultation, engagement is not a legal matter. It's actually very personal. Anyone from any institution can engage, and nonprofits stand in a special spot to know what's being done in consultation and being able to supplement this through engagement. And we'll talk a little bit more on the nonprofit piece later. Engagement doesn't need consultation. However, some big takeaways we'll talk about in these short 10 minutes will be taking a heart-forward approach and what that means, focusing on the relationship and engaging with Indigenous multimedia, which is huge. Next slide, please, Cara. To talk about this, I've broken it into 3 A's: approach, accessibility, and attitude. Next slide. I start with approach for obvious reasons. A heart-forward approach is very important to engagement of any kind. There's a volume edited by Indigenous archaeologists Keisha Supernaut and Natasha Lyons called Archaeologies of the Heart. And it discusses this critical shift in how business, academia, science, and the professional world more broadly is handled. A heart-forward approach breaks down an old perception of coldness and objectivity, and it requires an openness. This openness aligns with specifically tribal engagement and is necessary for working with Indigenous communities and partners, each of which are unique, and a heart-forward approach can help smash that harmful monolithic myth of Native communities and move forward towards highlighting each unique aspect of Indigenous communities. Separate the business from personal. It's also important to approach. Connecting on a personal level makes business partnerships, especially in the outdoor world, all the stronger. Often within this world of trails and public lands we find ourselves in, interests tend to overlap. Diversifying points of engagement might sound confusing, but it's the simple act of learning and sharing about these interests and goals, both professional and personal. Do you enjoy basketball? Consider attending a game with the community you're working with. The more you understand why community goals exist, the better equipped you can be to develop long-lasting partnerships and projects that support these goals and ultimately improve communities. Accessibility is the next day, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Leave the jargon at the door. No one likes that stuff. Don't push timelines that don't take cultural events and cultural calendars into account. Also, it becomes a question of how much space and time is given to address historical and ever-present traumas felt across Indigenous communities. Make no mistake, colonization is an ongoing process and an ever-present stress that should be considered during engagement and consultation. Getting the approach right and maintaining respectful space to ensure accessibility for Indigenous partners requires a long unlearning process. These books at the bottom of the slide, speaking of Indigenous politics and Burying My Heart at Wounded Knee, are just a few from my own library that were influential in my own unlearning. In the document in the middle, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, who some of you may know about if you're at our past webinars, is profoundly helpful in understanding the future of Indigenous communities, specifically a future outlined by them and for them. Next slide, Cara. So attitude is the last A and truly encompasses all of what engagement is. It seems redundant, but in this process where we need to stay accountable during decolonization and unlearning that's tied to engagement, redundancy is best. Awareness is the most common piece that's missing in engagement. In my varied conversations, no matter the type of organization, the size, and the resources available, there is a tension between groups because no one put in the time to become aware of the history of that space. Re-educate yourself. Engage with Indigenous multimedia. I can't say that enough, and it's really quite easy. The 2 examples at the bottom are just many great options for this. Watch Res Dogs for a laugh, but also to understand the deep generational trauma that was inflicted upon Indigenous communities in this country. Pay attention to how Indigenous news outlets report on current events. Get their perspective. Read, watch. People can tell when you're not invested in their goals and in their well-being. Increasing your awareness naturally cultivates interest. Always reinvent and improve what it means for you personally to be an ally, and the business partnership will only improve from there. Next slide, Cara, our final slide. Here are just some resources that I find useful on a daily basis. NAFPO, the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. If you want to find the right person to talk to, Seventh Sovereign LLC is an online course that goes specifically into these topics, very in depth, lots of case studies. Local tribal colleges with exclamation points for a reason. These are our leaders. Include Indigenous future professionals in your organizations and in your projects. The Ecological Society of America, their traditional ecological knowledge chapter, is very prolific in their publications. I highly recommend their series of webinars listed on their website. It is worth the time to spend to listen to Indigenous professionals speak about their field, their work, and specifically how they want non-natives to engage with them. Don't take my word for it. Seek out Indigenous scholars on these topics. And for the avid reader, some articles that I found critical to my unlearning process and tackle some specific hot topics like TEK. And that's all for me. And I hope you enjoyed that.
Amanda Grace, thank you so much for that overview of engagement. That was wonderful. Melissa, we're going to come back to you now to talk a little bit more about the intersection of engagement and consultation and a little bit more about where the nonprofit role may be.
Sure, thank you. So first of all, I know that a lot of you with the Trails Partnerships are, very active in doing projects and maintaining and rerouting and do all kinds of activities with your trails and that you support. I think with the thing with consultation and working with tribes is the need to understand and be respectful that a proposed project or some activity that you may be wanting to do on a trail may be in an area with sensitive cultural resources or very sensitive sacred sites. Tribes do not have to explain where these sites are exactly or why they're sacred or important. There's no need for them to share that information with the federal agency actually, or with a partner. And we try to avoid asking direct questions about those particular types of resources. It can even be that the person that you're consulting with may not be authorized by their tribe to share that information with anyone, and they may not even know some of the details themselves, just enough to know that an area needs to be protected. Again, and most tribes will ask if a partner is proposing a project. I'm not a trail administrator myself. Again, I'm just implementing a legal agreement for the Forest Service. The National Park Service is the administrator for the Trail of Tears National Historic Trail. But in the case of, for example, the Nez Perce Namipu Trail, which is Sandy Rancho McFarland is the official administrator for, it's not uncommon for the tribes to come back and ask one of the partners who may be proposing a project, or even ask Sandy or herself, do you know about this? And do you support this particular project? And are often asking why they have not been notified about a project. It's important that if you are proposing a project and you do end up being invited to share that proposal with a tribe or multiple tribes, that you're consistent when you offer that proposal. The tribes talk to one another all the time, particularly the TIPOs. They have a very tight network. I see Sheila's nodding her head. So if you change the project in between, if you're not consistent with how you're communicating that project, it can cause a lot of confusion and some mistrust. So be very careful when you're presenting something, that the proposal remains the same. It's important for the partner to keep in close communication with the trail administrators or the coordinators like myself with the federal agencies. There can be new types of authorities and initiatives and executive orders that come out that speak to tribal consultation, and we need to be careful that we are following those and the spirit of those laws and regulations. Many tribes have participating agreements with federal agencies, and they can participating agreements where they can even provide youth crews, public land corps crews, or tribal member crews to help with some work. Again, here in the Southeast, we're extremely focused on if we are working with a partner organization to create an Indigenous crew, that crew is made up of of tribal members from federally recognized tribes. That is very important to the tribes here in the Southeast, that we honor that and observe that federal recognition, and aren't recruiting or attempting to bring in folks that may be from state recognized tribes or other organizations that are calling themselves a tribe. So that is one thing that we've run into that's been a pretty big concern. Also, when the federal agency may come back to you with your project and require adjustments because of what has come out of a tribal consultation session, please know that we're doing that because we're trying to be as respectful as we can to the federally recognized tribes and their concerns, and to the resources, sacred sites, cultural resource sites. These are non-renewable resources, one of a kind things, and just trying to be as respectful as we possibly can. I know that one of the other big things that's been happening now, and we're working really carefully in our agency and in other agencies, is renaming of areas, removing offensive place names or reclaiming Indigenous place names. Please know that that is also a process that's very important that we work with the tribes on. The Indigenous place names, the tribal languages, are in effect the intellectual property of those tribes. So they have language groups within the tribes, particular scholars. So when we're proposing a name change or using something such as like the Cherokee syllabary on a sign, we consult with all 3 of the federally recognized Cherokee tribes, as an example, and they turn to their language speakers and their language groups, and they provide us they'll get together and meet and provide us the translation and the wording that they would like to see used, and the syllabary symbols that accompany that language that we would use. It's not something that we would come up with on our own, or we would try to piece together on the internet, or that we would propose without first talking to the tribe, or even having the tribe come to us and ask for those name changes. So please keep that in mind too. I know that that's something we all really want to do in renaming some of these places, but it's very important to involve the tribes in that activity. We've been very successful. I know Sandy's been really successful recently in naming some places, again, like removing the S word, as well as she's mentioned Mount Howard, as General Howard was involved in the War of the Nez Perce in 1877. Or she also provided an example of Dead Indian Hill. So she's done a lot of work with the Nez Perce. Sandy is herself a member of the Nez Perce tribe, and they have recently renamed some areas along the trail, reclaiming those Indigenous place names with the help of the tribe and the Trail Association as well. So for my work with the Trail of Tears National Historic Trail and our remediation of damage that a couple of our employees caused to a 1-mile section. Again, we entered into tribal consultation first. In fact, Sheila was part of that group for several years. And then when it came to actually implementing the project on the ground, we turned to our a lot of trail partners that helped us and worked with us, and with some tribal representatives who were present on site too in that implementation. So it, you know, those volunteers, those trail organizations like the Benton Mackay Trail Association, the Long Distance Hikers Group, even the Georgia Endurance Runners Group who came up and did some work for us, they were all instrumental, and we all worked together in implementing the project once it had been, the damage had been assessed. The project had been designed by some professionals with our Trails Enterprise team with the Forest Service, and then consulted on with the federally recognized tribes. So that's pretty much where our intersection has come with a lot of the trails groups in that way. We've also worked very closely with the National Forest Foundation. They have helped us secure some grant funding to allow tribal members and some of our tribal public land corps groups to come back to the east, to their ancestral homelands, and participate in conservation activities, projects on the Forest Service, even helping with some routine maintenance, just brushing and limbing some sections of the Trail of Tears. And they've been very instrumental in helping supply the tribes with some grant funding that they were able to acquire from some corporations to support that travel. You know, being 1,000 miles away from home, that's quite an ask for these young people, some as young, you know, as 18, 16 years old, who are coming back. And some of them have never even been back in the East in their ancestral homeland. So it's quite a big journey for that. So we're very appreciative to organizations that can help us reconnect tribes with their ancestral homelands from which they were forcibly deported in the 1800s. So I think, you know, again, once we've done the formal government tribal consultation, and once we've secured the tribes are okay with us opening it up and bringing in more partners for some type of an engagement or collaborative activity, then we will do that. But there are some times where there are tribes that don't want to participate in things like that. They only want to participate in the government to government function. And we do try to, we definitely respect that when that happens. And we just ask that, you know, for your understanding and your respect in that as well. So that's my little bit on the intersection of engagement and consultation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melissa. Sheila, I'm going to bring you in now. Can you share with us a bit about your perspective on consultation and engagement?
Absolutely. Can you hear me now? Do
Yes.
have my microphone functioning? All right, great. You know, when I was invited to participate with this panel, I jumped at the opportunity. Number one, I have a long working history with Melissa and the U.S. Forest Service, particularly in the Cherokee National Forest, the Nantahala, all the Forest Service and trails that's in the eastern part, Tennessee, Georgia, you know, North and South Carolina, those areas that are important to us, which at a time when my people called it home, well, some still do, but prior to engagement with the new world, I guess you would say, we didn't have any boundaries. You know, we didn't see the state lines that were there. We had lower towns, we had upper towns, middle towns, for various reasons. But we recognized each other as one group of people. We recognized our neighbors. So whenever I was asked to speak on the trail system, and it's because as a former TIPO, I'm a former TIPO for the Cherokee Nation and the United Kituwah Band, both Cherokee tribes in Oklahoma. My very first trip back home didn't come until I was an adult. And as an adult, the project that Melissa was referencing in the Cherokee National Forest was one of my first ones, my first major consultations with our federal partners. And I do call them partners because it's exactly what we are. And we have to partner to make this work. And unfortunately, it did start off with a bang. You know, we started off with an agency that didn't recognize or follow through with the complete protocol. And it put me through a school of hard knocks on learning how to mitigate through these problems in the legal status of our position as tribal historic preservation officers. And I know that that's a new term for a lot of people, and I know you're here to learn. We're here to share our perspectives. I'm here to share a perspective from just one tribe. There's 574 of us across the United States, each with unique languages and identities, and everybody deserves to have their voice heard in these matters. But me today, I'm speaking from my experience in working for the Cherokee people that I have represented from Oklahoma. But, you know, again, starting off on a project-based issue came by understanding who we are as a sovereign nation and working with the United States government and the laws that are set in place that allow us to have this voice. And I think that Melissa can attest to the fact that when this issue came up, we really had to search high and low on a resolve because it was so unique. But that's the benefit of this, was creating that partnership. And that's how we all grew close in these working endeavors, because we were all sensitive to this issue, and we all put where the tribes put their heart in it. I'm not saying that the federal partners did not, because I can attest to how passionate Melissa is about her job in her role as a liaison to the tribes. But there's a lot of entities out there. There's a lot of different branches of the government that had a role in this action. You know, because whenever I look at the questions that we were talking about on presenting today, one of them was the sacred geography, you know, talking about understanding that for tribes and how it's different. And particularly on the Trail of Tears, it wasn't just in one forest, it crossed all the way from the Qualla boundary to Oklahoma. And there's so many different routes and trails and different forests, not just one, that we have to find our footprint out there. It's there. We know the different routes that, as a removed tribe, you know, we know the different routes where our family members were marched. They weren't just giving a free ride to Oklahoma. You know, it was a troublesome error that our ancestors had to survive, or I wouldn't even be here to speak to you from Oklahoma, which I'm in Oklahoma. You know, we are the home of 39 tribal nations, and coming to you from Norman, Oklahoma, I recognize that I come to you from the ancient land of the Caddo and the Wichita affiliated tribes. We respect that. But, you know, on the trail part, for the Trail of Tears, another thing that we had learned as far as sacred geography was the true imprint, the true footprint. So when we're looking at recreation ideas, when we're looking at even special permits that we attain from our federal partners, you know, for a tribe, we've got our job cut out for us, because we really have to look at every angle and every avenue of what is happening in our homelands, because even though we have an idea of where the original trails were, and some of them you can tell very clearly because it's their feet, the path that they made by walking made clear trail signs were visible. But, you know, Melissa can attest to this as well, that some of these trails were made for tourism. They didn't really reflect the actual trail that my people had walked over. And without that level of education or understanding, you know, we're just taking a tourism map initially and trying to work with our partners on securing our cultural resources, the footprint that my people had laid for generations, since the early 1800s, and for them to be true and not true. The sacredness that falls with it is that there's so many instances where we could look back on projects that have been proposed on a tourism route, not an actual route where my people had walked. And so that was one of the challenges. And we would have never found that or found a way to make it right or to truth some of these trails without the partnership that we had established with the U.S. Forest Service and TVA. There's several agencies out there that we work with in our homeland. But, you know, we have a different approach to it because it's not just saving land. It's not just saving a landscape. It's not saving a scenery. You know, we're protecting where our ancestors lay, because, you know, for the Cherokees, not only speak for us, you know, we lost a third of our people during that removal route through one of the most difficult winters. You know, we talk about climate change right now. You know, we understand how the climate affected that specific winter of all winters, you know, for this to happen. It happened during the worst time for my people. And about a third of the people that walked that trail route didn't make it. So whenever we think about projects that are taking place along those trail routes, or just between here and there, here in the Qualla boundary, we have to search high and low. And when I was a very young Tipo, that was my greatest fear, is approving a project that I felt like I didn't do everything possible that I could do to protect the integrity of that proposed project. But what did I do? I reached out to our federal partners, and because there's no Tipo school. That's the point that we've been trying to make a long time for the tribes. We don't come out of college. We don't come out of our communities learning about these particular projects. We're just as new as some of you learning about who we are. Whenever we learn these laws and this statutory requirements and these policies that are involved, we're all brand new when we walk into this world. But it's a great level of passion when we talk about the sacredness of these geographies and the footprints of our ancestors that inspire our learning and give us an opportunity to learn to talk and expand our understanding on what is really happening here. And as groups and organizations are coming out to the forest, and you're looking at activities and different ways to participate, we actually embrace the idea that somebody who cares enough about the landscape wants to take care of it and is visible, because we're not there anymore. We're not in most of them. And while Cherokees, there's a lot of Cherokees that still live out in the east. There's even more that has been removed than remains. So between here and there, when we're talking about different partners and organizations who are passionate about the landscape, we were passionate first because that was our home. But we totally embrace the idea that other groups and organizations can come in and help and embrace this community that belongs to them too, but do it in a way that respects us and what our concerns are as tribes. And just because you're not a federal partner doesn't mean that you can't reach out to our people or even expand within these different agencies and figure it out. You can ask yourself a question like, this is what we plan to do. How are the tribes engaged? Would this impact the tribes? How can we talk to someone from the tribe? We're not just limited to federal agencies. We are limited to anyone who is trying to take part in a landscape that my people called home first. And of course, we would want somebody there to care for it, to keep it its natural beauty. And if we do have trails, let's keep them safe and let's keep them broad, so mitigating and looking for looters. We have looting that takes place in our homelands, and that's so disturbing. The more people that are engaged in controlled areas, I think that could protect us from looting. Learn different ways to report that. Look at your migratory bird laws, because, at one point in time, we met with an official who offered one of our student participants, our young Kituwah participants, offered them an eagle feather for their good work. Well, it's against federal law for them to have that in their desk and for them to offer that to our youth. That's our job. We embody that sacredness that belongs to that. Whenever I addressed that with this person in leadership, they had no idea, but they should. So to me, as a tribe, we've studied hard to learn these federal laws on our own, to look at these statutory requirements and all these policies on our own, to try to protect what is sacred to us. As a job, we felt like the agency should have made a point to understand the sacredness of that eagle feather. I have a whole eagle here in my home, but I had to go through a series of permits and applications to qualify myself to have that bird. And the nation embodies the eagle as our state, our country, the reverence of it. And I use that eagle to teach our young. I go to different schools and I teach them about migratory bird laws and how to protect and how to respect. So while we're learning these things on our own as an agency, we just felt like that should have been a part of the protocol. But that also reinforced our partnership too, because we were able to share our perspective on why they had to give me the eagle feather. And I, in turn, gave that to a young gentleman that showed his maturity in our ceremonial ways, in ways that they didn't even recognize. But I recognized it, and he definitely deserved to have that award. But it comes from us and not them. That's why I'm talking about expanding your understanding. You can reach out to different agencies, different areas, with the issue on the Cherokee National Forest, when we had a whole mile of our trail damaged and torn apart, that really hurt to such a degree. It took us forever to get over it. It took us a long time to find ways to mitigate through that. But it didn't divide us. I think it brought us together, because at the end, we still have to come home. We had to come home to Oklahoma. And we still have to trust the folks who lived there and care about the same land that we did, maybe in two different ways. But they care enough to try to protect it and to make it right. And for the community, we don't want things like that closed off, because we want people to know about it, but learn about all of the content. Learn about who was there first. And if it comes with a bad story about removal, then it just does. We can't hide those things anymore. But our ancestors left us with more than a bad story. They left us with ways to be resilient and to still be excellent and to still be successful in whatever predicament we find ourselves in. And so we're teaching our young people to write a new narrative, not a narrative of loss, but a narrative of win. But we still face a lot of challenges on these different trails because of the recreational activities that are there. And how do we protect them? We worry about that being so far away. And when we go home, it means a lot to us because, and I tell people, well, if I haven't been back to the East in about a year, I have to go home and touch base because it renews our spirit, it renews our energy. And I guess for a long time, I'm glad I didn't go back until I was an adult, because growing up in my tribal community and learning about the removal period, it wasn't a good feeling, and it's not a good thing to grow up learning that part of your history. But once you do, what do we do best with that? The people who are stewards of that land today, we can partner with them and educate them on why it's important to us, the sacredness of that important meaning. And we have found ways to work with our federal partners. I've been out there talking to different organizations in the past. I've been contracted by the Trailatiers Association, and I've gotten to go out there and speak in a different way, but with the same story, with the same passion, and relaying what I feel like my ancestors would have wanted me to say. Because when we speak with them behind us and with us. But our footprint is very relevant. Our story is still real. Archaeology, they learn more about us in a week. They have timestamps for us, the Mississippian period, things like that, but I'm like, I was a discussant one year on the Mississippian period, and I was able to bring every one of those papers. They wrote 10 papers talking about different timestamps for my people. And I was able to bring all 10 of those stories forward and connect them to our living culture today. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to come and speak to you. I think that as removed tribes, we can share the same history that a lot of tribes feel on these different trail sites, because some of those roads, we made them. And some of those roads are old military roads. So my people have traveled those roads longer than anybody. But we still own the spirit. We might not own the land there, but we own the spirit. And we own the story. And we're willing to share it and tell it. If your organizations feel the need to expand your thought and understanding, I think it will carry you a long way and will help you understand the meaningfulness of the landscape and why we're not in there to delay any project, as some people have said in the past. They said to consult with the tribes takes a long time. Well, there's a bunch of us, and we can't just take one big look and say, oh, yeah, you can go. We have to do some work. We appreciate the opportunity to do it, and we take it seriously, just as I have speaking with you today. But I leave you with that message. If you have any questions, I'll be here to answer.
Sheila, thank you so much for sharing all that. That was wonderful. Now I'm going to move on to Bruce, and Bruce will share a bit with us about how Ayanta has engaged in some of the projects that they've worked on.
Thanks, Cara. Will you run my PowerPoint? Great. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for attending the presentation. My name, as Cara said, is Bruce Rettig, and I serve as tribal content developer for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. A little bit about myself: I've been involved with Ayanta for almost 10 years, and have attended 5 of their American Indian tourism conferences. I've worked in tourism marketing for over 30 years and owned and managed my own tourism marketing agency. And over the past 15 years, I've specialized in tribal tourism. Ayanta's office is located in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but I'm working out of South Lake Tahoe near the border of California and Nevada. The main Nevada tribes I've worked with in Nevada are the Northern Paiute, Southern Paiute, Western Shoshone, and in my neighborhood, the Washoe of California and Nevada. There are actually 32 Indian reservations and colonies that stretch across the state of Nevada. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And it's been my job to help promote a lot of those entities. A little over 2 years ago, I was hired as travel photographer and writer for Anza's Lewis and Clark project, which is a collaborative effort with the National Park Service. And during that time, I was also enrolled in the George Washington University, and I received a certificate in cultural heritage tourism. Last year, I began working on another Anza project focused on the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail and helping with their outreach efforts, which is also a collaboration with the National Park Service. I've always been impressed with Anza's work and happy to be a part of the team. Founded in 1998, Anza was established by tribes for tribes to address inequalities or inequities in the tourism system. They're governed by an all-native board of directors, and Anza serves as a united voice for the $14 billion native hospitality sector. And one of the main objectives of Anza is to facilitate conversations with the native communities, federal agencies, nonprofit associations, and elected officials on the economics and cultural importance of a healthy hospitality industry in Indian country. Next slide, please. Oops. This is the Anza team, and it's headed by Sherry Rupert, who is Anza CEO. And Sherry is a leading voice when it comes to advocating for travel and tourism as a significant economic driver in tribal nations. She was also integral in working with Congress to pass the Native American Tourism and Improving Visitor Experience, known as the NATIVE Act. Gail Shihak is Anza's outreach coordinator and our team leader, and she co-authored the book Native Peoples of the Northwest. And her experience includes working for 10 years in Washington, D.C. for the National Congress of American Indians, the Morning Star Institute, and the Indian Arts and Crafts Shops. She's a Klamath Indian tribal member. Hannah Peterson is Anza's development director and works to advance the mission of Anza through strategic fundraising and program development. Lorraine Lewis is Anza's research and data specialist. Lorraine is a member of the Laguna Taos Hopi and attended both the Institute of American Indian Arts and College of Santa Fe. Her professional experience includes working in economic development and the nonprofit sector, and she's currently serves as on the Institute of American Indian Arts Foundation board. Lorraine is an award-winning artist and small business owner, and she's a big supporter of Indigenous arts and culture. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of Anza's outreach efforts to tribes along the Lewis and Clark Historic Trail and some of the things we've accomplished over the last couple of years during this program. Next slide, please. In partnership with the National Park Service, Anza works with tribes adjacent to the Lewis and Clark Trail to develop cultural heritage content and itineraries for the trail's new travel website, which is lewisandclark.travel. As well as Anza's tourism site, nativeamerica.travel. The project brings together businesses, attractions, landmarks, and other points of interest on and around the trail to help promote sustainable tourism. For this project, we work with Dan Wiley, Larry Calhoun, and Bri Leffler of National Park Service. Both Larry and Bri joined us on a recent trip to South Dakota. It was great having them along and experiencing Indian country along the trail. Next slide, please. The way this project started, it kind of dovetailed. The foundation of this project was built during the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial, and our work is kind of a continuance of everything accomplished during this collaboration. For those of you not familiar with the Bicentennial, from 2003 to 2006, the Circle of Tribal Advisors worked together during the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial commemoration in order to tell the American Indian story. The Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail Partnership expands on this groundwork, contributions and learnings from the Circle of Tribal Advisors, and it offers new opportunities for tribes to share their stories to visitors around the globe through cultural tourism. Next slide, please. During our outreach traveling, we're fortunate to have met and interviewed Otis Halfmoon and Alan Pinkham, both strong supporters of the Anza and our efforts. Otis Halfmoon is a retired National Park Service interpreter with the Nez Perce, and Alan Pinkham Sr. is a former chairman of the Nez Perce tribe. Alan also co-wrote the book Lewis and Clark Among the Nez Perce. Both were active members of the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial Commemoration that I just mentioned, and that was spearheaded by the National Park Service from 1999 through 2006. Native people have a complex relationship with the Lewis and Clark expedition, and we heard a lot of their stories as we were traveling. Most historical accounts come from the perspective of the expedition and not from the tribes they encountered. More than a backdrop to the expedition, these tribal narratives are an integral part of the story of the United States. Both Otis and Alan shared a lot of great stories with us as we traveled. Next slide, please. I had mentioned the two websites. NativeAmerica.travel is the ANTA's premier destination website, connecting travelers to unique American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian destinations in the United States. It offers travelers an experience while reflecting the compelling stories of Indian country, and it serves as a major marketing tool for international travelers. Every tribe across the nation is represented on this website. And again, it's a great marketing tool when Sherry Rupert, our CEO, goes to international trade shows such as ITV Berlin. She can use it to show what there is to see and do in Indian country. Next slide, please. The other website that I help develop content for is lewisandclark.travel. And that's a geotourism site that brings diverse partners along Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail together and helps to reestablish partnerships and renew collaborative efforts. So we're working on this website as well to help promote the tribal stories along the trail. Next slide, please. Geotourism, of course, is tourism that sustains or enhances the geographic character of a place, its environment, culture, aesthetics, heritage, and the well-being of its residents. So this site really focuses on that. Geotourism encompasses a range of travel, including culture and heritage, history, food, nature, adventure, the outdoors, water, music, and arts. We always keep that in mind as we travel throughout Indian country. The next step in looking forward is regenerative tourism. Regenerative tourism aims to restore the harm that our system has already done to the natural world, and by using nature's principles to create the conditions of life to flourish. This concept dovetails nicely into the native views of environmental protections and regeneration and ties into the overall efforts of our outreach goals. Next slide, please. After a year of Zoom calls, we had started the project, or I had joined the team when COVID had hit. So we had to do a lot of our outreach via Zoom. So it was time to hit the road when it opened up, and we hit it pretty fast and we hit it pretty hard. Once we started traveling, we also hosted several free tourism marketing workshops, and that developed specifically for tribes located along the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. The first workshop was free, and it took place at the Wild Horse Casino and Resort in Pendleton, Oregon. And it was also available online, and we have a recording of it on our website. Next slide, please. This first trip, we began at Cape Disappointment, and we began to make our way east through Oregon and Washington. So in total, the first trip, I think we did in about 5 or 6 days through 2 states, and we hit a lot of sites along the way. Next slide, please. We visited 19 locations that included tribal offices, tribal enterprises, and tribally owned businesses. Along the way, we met with various organizations who collaborate and partner with local tribes, including the Confluence Project. The Confluence Project works with local tribes to connect people to the history, living cultures, and ecology of the Columbia River system through Indigenous voices. So there's several local tribal members on their board that oversee a lot of the projects that the Confluence Project does. And the Columbia River Confluence Project originally formed to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Lewis and Clark expedition, again, looking back to that celebration. And artist Maya Lin, who was a designer of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., was commissioned to design interpretive artwork for 7 locations along the Columbia and Snake Rivers. And the Confluence connects the history, living cultures, and ecology of the Columbia River through these projects. Next slide, please. Another example of different coalitions and partnerships is the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. It's a coalition of 4 tribes, the Yakima, Umatilla, Warm Springs, and Nez Perce. The Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission brings tribal views to the table in an effort to ensure that salmon are provided that respect according by tribal cultural beliefs and required under law. It also allows the tribes to develop common strategies to educate non-Indians on the importance of salmon to the environment, culture, economy, and ultimately the entire region's well-being. We visited several of the fish ladders along the river, and we were also given a tour of all the different stops along the way where you could buy over the bank salmon. In working to restore salmon in rivers, the group also works to benefit all the citizens of the region. Next slide, please. This is along the locks, and its staff of the organization has a huge staff. It has legal experts, biologists, hydrologists, enforcement officers, and public information specialists. They all support the fisheries management, fisheries science, fisheries enforcement, policy development, outreach, and watershed restoration. I always like to use this organization as an example of a lot of different components coming together to work as one whole. Next slide, please. Here's one of the over the bank salmon sales. And it was really interesting because they had gotten some funding also to help teach a lot of the fishers how to properly prepare the fish, how to sell it, and also to buy ice machines to keep it on ice. So this organization has grown to become an internationally known and respected champion of tribal rights and resource protection, and an authoritative entity working on behalf of Native fish and Native people in the Columbia River Basin. They also offer what they call Salmon Camp, and it's a component of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission's Tribal Workforce Development Program, where the annual camp focuses on providing culturally relevant science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, experiences to foster an interest in natural resource careers and close the academic achievement gap for Native American youth. It's a great program. Next slide, please. For outreach trip 2, we made our way through Washington and Idaho along this route. Next slide, please. In this trip, we visited 19 locations that included tribal offices, tribal enterprises, and tribally owned businesses in Washington and Idaho. During this time, we met with the Nez Perce, who hosted a lunch that included representatives and guests that were from a variety of different entities, and it was just a great lunch. There were people from the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, Nez Perce Tourism, Nez Perce Workforce Development, Nez Perce Operations, Nez Perce Enterprises, and Nez Perce Tribal Cultural Resources. It was a great lunch, and everybody getting together and networking and talking and how to go about promoting this territory in a thoughtful way. It was very good networking system. Next slide, please. This is our third outreach trip that we did. Outreach trip 3, we just recently made a couple months ago in July. We made our way through South Dakota and touched the northernmost part of Nebraska. And this is also where Larry and Brian met up with us from the National Park Service, and we saw some of the sites. Next slide, please. This trip was our longest trip, and we actually visited 24 locations, and we also attended a meeting of the South Dakota Native Tourism Alliance, which was really beneficial because it was all the tribes of South Dakota getting together, talking specifically about tourism and tourism efforts. And it was another great networking experience. And our CEO, Sherry Rupert, was a presenter at the meeting, and she highlighted everything Anza offers and how they can help the tribes in their efforts. We've learned that a lot of different tribes have very advanced tourism efforts and tourism marketing programs, and other tribes haven't even began and don't know where to begin. And then there's everything in between. So every tribe is different, and Anza helps in trying to fill that gap in whatever needs they might have. Next slide, please. This is just an example of one of the many stories we heard and perspectives that we learned. One of the tribes we visited were the Lower Brule, who provided us a tour of their lands near the Big Bend area of South Dakota. And it's just so great being on the road and learning these stories. And then, of course, it's my job to help relay those stories onto the websites and into all the marketing collateral that we have. And of course, we always ask the tribes what they want to share, and then, we respect what they don't want to share. One of the places that they shared with us on this, with the Lower Brule, next slide, please. was a hill near the Missouri River, right near the Big Bend. It was actually climbed by Meriwether Lewis and noted in his journal, and it's where they met the Lower Brule tribe. And that's us hiking in the lower left slide there. And below at the bottom of the hill is Earth Lodge. And it was just so unique to see in just such a beautiful location, and to hear the story of that time in history, and to see that it's still pristine. And it's available for people to go up and visit and be respectful. Just a beautiful trail. Next slide, please. Just a couple examples of some results from some of the work that we did with the websites. Salmon King Fisheries, they had a very small web presence, a one-page web page, and then their Facebook page. And we did outreach with them and also met them when we were up on our travels. And we posted a page for them, and they gotten back in touch with us and said 2 weeks after we posted the page, they had a tour bus show up with 20 people. They were able to eat at their location, and they asked about their tours, and they had found this specific tribally owned business on NativeAmerica.travel. So we're so happy to hear those types of stories. And again, these are free listings, and they're free to all the tribes, and it's a result of our outreach efforts. We're very proud of that. Next slide, please. And here's another Brigham Fish Market. They're located along the Columbia River, but they also have a location within the casino, the tribal casino. So we posted 2 different listings on the website, and they've received a lot of traffic to their businesses. And also we link to their websites and to their Facebook pages. Next slide, please. I think I'm doing okay on time. This is our outreach program along the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail. This is another partnership with the National Park Service, and we work with Naomi Torres of the National Park Service. Next slide, please. One of the main things that we're producing in this project is a travel guide highlighting all the tribal sites of interest and telling the tribal history of the De Anza Trail. Again, just as we're doing with Lewis and Clark.travel, it's about relaying the tribal story and the tribal histories. It was so interesting when Sheila was presenting, when she was talking about tourism trails versus indigenous trails. That was one of the main consistent things we heard throughout our travels. Whenever we talked about the Anza Trail, they said, you know, most of the tribes all said the same thing. They said, you know, this trail system was here to begin with. We always use this trail, and people think it's the De Anza Trail, but we've used these trail systems for time immemorial. So that was really interesting to hear, and it was consistent with most all the different tribes we outreach to. Next slide, please. Another component of this project that we're really excited about is we're doing a place name maps. And Margaret Pierce is a citizen of the Potawatomi tribe and cartographer, and she worked on a similar project up in Canada. You might be familiar with it. She does beautiful work, and we're in the middle of finishing up this project as well. And it's going to have all the different place names of the De Anza Trail, all the way down south, all the way up to Northern California. So we're really excited about this component of the project as well. Next slide, please. We completed 3 trips along the De Anza Trail this year, including sections through Arizona, Southern California, and Northern California. This is a historic map showing the route going through those locations. Next slide, please. Trip 1 focused on Southern California along Palm Desert. So we got to see a lot of tribal and visit tribal entities down there. I had just left the snow in South Lake Tahoe. This was in February, and they actually had snow down in Palm Desert. So that was a little bit of a surprise, but we were still able to meet with a lot of the tribes. Next slide, please. And we visited 18 locations, different tribal offices, enterprises, and businesses along the way. And we were able to accumulate a lot of great information, photography. We also do video interviews as we go along in all these projects. So we're able to get a lot of good video footage as well from different tribal representatives. And all this will be used under the permission of the tribes in order to tell their story the way they want it told. Next slide, please. This is our outreach trip 2. This was Arizona. And we went down there and circled around through all the different tribes. Next slide, please. And these were all the tribes that we visited. We visited 19 locations, and it was just a very rich experience seeing different tribes, Paskayaki tribe and the Salt River tribe. They toured us around their gardens, which were beautiful. And that gave us a little sense of agritourism and how we can promote agritourism in Indian country. We do have an agritourism booklet that we produced a couple years ago, and we really want to be there to help support any agritourism efforts that the tribes have to offer. Next slide, please. This was our latest trip, and this was in July as well. It was our outreach trip 3, and it went to Northern California, up near where I live, and it just I learned so much once again, so much history that I didn't know. This particular photo is a Thule boat that's at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it was created by a tribal member, and she also sailed it out into the near Monterey Bay. Next slide, please. And for this trip, we visited 19 locations. And we also accumulated, one thing that we always try to emphasize too is artwork, tribal artwork and murals that depict the history of the tribes along the trail. And we were able to capture a lot of great photography and imagery of the history of the tribes in Northern California. We also went to the Friendship House in Oakland, which was a great experience. They referred to themselves as urban Indians, and hearing their stories and how they were relocated into the urban environments. And so it was just a whole unique story, going from Northern California, from Arizona to Southern California to Northern California. And again, learning the unique histories of each one of the tribes. Next slide, please. So just kind of to summarize our anti-tribal outreach, we help the tribes tell their stories. Of course, that's the main emphasis through video interviews, photographs, web listings, tour guides, and tourism marketing. When a tribe is listed on nativeamerica.travel, they get the added benefit of also utilizing all of our marketing networks, whether it be the social media networks, our newsletter, just all the different marketing that we do. And again, it's all about on the approval of each tribe. Next slide, please. But most importantly, it's about making connections and building relationships. These are some of the many people that we've reached out to. And again, it's such a rich experience in learning all this. And I've learned so much on the trail, and then trying to relay that into the written and photographic form. That's part of my job is to get that content, out there and tell the story the way the tribes want it told. And it's just a very rich experience. Next slide, please. And also the collaboration and partnerships. Working with the National Park Service is just a great relationship. They have been so supportive in wanting to get that tribal story, and for us to help with that. And it's a great partnership and collaboration. And one thing that we've heard throughout all our travels too, whenever we talk to a tribe, most all of them are looking for good, strong partnerships and true partnerships. So I feel as though ANTA is good at helping to fill that need. Next slide, please. This is my information. Thank you for letting me present today. I just hearing the other presentations, I'm just very grateful for being able to present. And I'll put in the chat, I'll put a couple links. We've got a link to the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail page, which gives you a little bit more information about that program, and then the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail page. That's on the ANTA website as well. And then I'll also post, we have our American Indian Tourism Conference coming up next month in October. So I'll also post a link for that. But thank you very much. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for talking about how IANTA has worked with tribes on a number of projects. That was wonderful. We do have a couple of questions here in the chat. Just give me one moment. And I know, Sheila and Melissa, you've added some discussion around those questions in the chat too, but I would love for it to be a little bit more of a discussion if possible. Callum asks, like a lot of work with tribes, consultation is done with federally recognized tribes. What does consultation and engagement with state recognized and unrecognized tribes look like? If that doesn't exist, what steps could be made to help those tribes be involved more?
Do you want to take that one, Sheila, or would you like me to take that one? Oh, so I'm going to speak for the Southeast. I know California is different, as is Alaska. With the state recognized tribes, they are like any other public consulting group. So if we're, if the Forest Service is reaching out to the public about a project or having public meetings, those folks are definitely more than welcome to attend. But this specific, private government to government consultation, that is reserved for federally recognized tribes. That is one of the benefits of being a federally recognized tribe.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Sheila, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Maybe you need to unmute her.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
My gosh, I'm just having all kinds of technical difficulties today. I thought that was a good question. And yes, I did answer that in the comment because one of the things with TIPOs is the fact that and in my particular situation, we are a removed tribe. So we had 17 states on our consulting list because we either touched all those different routes coming to Oklahoma, and then again, our historical boundaries. So collectively, so that means we had to reserve our time to speak to the federal agencies on these projects. And trust me, we would love to talk to everybody regarding these projects, but we did reserve our time for the federal process because that's all we had time for. And like I said, 17 states, that means 17 different DOTs. And how many roads projects are going on at the same time? You can't travel anywhere. You can't go on vacation without some type of road construction. Well, there's no place that you can put a shovel in on this continent and not be in a territory that would concern a tribe. So we're looking at those projects, not only with DOT, we're looking at the Forest Service, FEMA, there's so many, there's 95 different federal agencies, I believe. And we consulted with 26 of them continually. So whenever I.
Oh no, I think we lost Sheila. Well, hopefully she pops back in here soon. We can have her finish, but I will move on to another question in the meantime. If there is little or no history of engagement with tribes, where is a good place to start, in addition to continuous learning and unlearning?
I'll start. A good place to start, like I said, NAFPO is a good place to start. Also websites, creating master docs for information so that you can really collect all of the information of how each tribe describes themselves versus federally. You can glean a lot from their websites that they host. You can see a lot of their goals. They have a lot of community newsletters. You can subscribe if it's open in that way. That's a really good place to start. Introducing yourself if you're new to the position. Yeah, very, very simple things. I have a master doc of all the information that I've learned through my time, and it just keeps growing, and I reference it constantly when I want to engage with a new community And I think about the things that I know about the already community I'm engaging with, and I ask those questions. And I just introduce myself first and foremost.
Thank you so much, Amanda Grace. Anyone want to add anything to that before we go to the next question?
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I know with the Forest Service anyway, in the southern and eastern regions, we have and I put it in the chat, we have an annual meeting with a lot of the tribes who were removed from their homelands. So those folks that are currently were removed to Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, that type of area, called Bridging the Gap. And in 2023, that meeting will be March 6th through 9th. I just got these dates yesterday. Quapaw Nation will be the host of the event. So, check out Quapaw Nation's website, their social media when they finally, when they do get up and running. Again, they were just announced that they're hosting it. There'll be information there about this event, and they're great presentations. It's a great place to meet people. It's a great place to see what the tribes are interested in. There are other federal agencies and state agencies and nonprofits that attend that conference, and I highly recommend it.
Thanks, Melissa. Bruce, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to mention once again that the American Indian Tourism Conference, it's next month. It's October 24th to 27th, and it's just such a rich experience. And again, if you think it's all about just tourism, it's not. It's about telling the story again, telling the tribal story and about cultural aspect. So I'd highly recommend it, at least looking at the webpage for the conference and considering going. We get a lot of attendees from all over the states, and just when they start sharing their stories, and again, they're all on various stages of the spectrum of starting tourism to really pronounced marketing programs. So it's very beneficial. I just highly suggest checking it out. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Sheila, sorry you got cut off. I don't know if you want to add anything to what you were saying.
And I don't know how long it's going to let me stay on here, but I'll throw in a few more comments real quick while I have time. I would reach out, if it's a federal undertaking, I would reach out to the agency and say, hey, we are interested in talking with the tribes. I think some of the tribes who have time would appreciate a dialogue of such. We understand the federal agencies aren't always on that project. They're just over it because it is a federal undertaking. If that's your community, if you're using a federal permit, federal funding approval, then it does qualify to be a federal undertaking. So they have to have a lead agency. If that's your community, I would reach out to them and say, we would like to talk to the tribes. Don't know if they're going to have time. But, even if you get 1 out of 10 or 12 or however many tribes are involved with that review process, and reach out to them before you ever need something from them. When I was a TIPO for the Cherokee Nation, I resigned from there to become a consultant. And I did that because one of the companies that we were working for really wanted to develop a tribal program. They just didn't know how to do it. So I took the opportunity to put our voice into that program design. And that's what we did, basically. If they didn't have time, at least we put someone in that role who understood the process and who could connect with you. And that's what I do right now for the Texas military and the Arkansas military. I'm a liaison for them, and I bring the tribes to the table. I know the rules. I know what they want. And sometimes they don't have time. It's very overwhelming. A lot of the offices are understaffed. So it's not that they don't want to meet with you. I think some of them want to. But that company that hired me first, that's what we did. I told them, I said, I will join your team. But the first thing I think we need to do is go meet the tribes before we ever ask anything from them. Get to know them, learn who they are. If they're local to your community, stick out that olive branch and start talking to them early on. That way, when a project does come through you'll already have an established relationship with them. And partnership is key. You know, we use that partnership to help us get through this federal process. But a lot of times the partner, the federal agency can come in and oversee that project, and they might not even live there. But if you live there, you are the steward of that land. I think we all have a responsibility to connect. And a lot of our tribes are very diverse economically. They're probably already in your community as business owners, landowners, neighbors, friends. Start having those conversations early. That's what I can recommend.
Sheila, thank you so much. We do have another question here from Ellen. Please address proposed Advancing Tribal Parity on Public Land Act and the Historic Preservation Enhancement Act in terms of how they can aid engagement and what we can do in allyship.
It's having a conversation, because all of these acts and permits, they're widespread. They're not just a linear project where you can just have one conversation and think that that's it. I think that whenever we're talking about tribal engagement on any of these, and if you apply these same rules to any level of project that you have, it's getting to know who they are and identifying who to talk to. Because even when I do work with tribes and I help them develop their programs, you know, sometimes I have to bring different departments together and let them know that they are connected and how they can support one another. I think the tribes, if they have time, but that's why when they're engaged on federal projects, they might not have time. But that's why you start looking for opportunities to build those relationships ahead of those projects. And I think that using all these different measures, the protocols, these executive orders, you know, we had to learn on our own. Like I said, there's no TIPO school. But if we have the capability of learning, so do you. I think that you should have an effort to learn what the tribes are doing, understanding the process. It's public information. If you get on the ACHP's website, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, they have a lot of teaching tools on there. I put in the comments where we have a podcast, Tippo Talk, tippotalk.com. It's more of a tribal perspective. I mean, we talk about from our angle, but if you're wanting to learn some of these rules and why we apply these processes, I would encourage you to go to the ACHP's website, because not only do they do tribal protocol, they work with anybody in historic preservation. A lot of learning tools. There's a lot for you guys to take a look, not just for the TIPO office, but maybe even in your own community projects. These same rules apply. The only thing that's different is we are a sovereign nation. We're a domestic dependent nation. We are a nation within a nation. That's the relationship we've had with the federal government 200 years, you know, but it's there. And I'm glad that you guys are here learning about it right now. And I'm glad that I can throw my 2, 3, 4, 5 cents into this conversation, because there's different ways that we can advance all of our interests. The tribes can protect theirs, and you can look out for yours and cut some of this in half. Early conversation, that's all I can continue to promote, is try to reach out and have an early conversation with the local tribes. And some of the tribes might not even be within your area, but that doesn't take away their right. Whenever I was talking about those 17 states that we consult in, it's because we do have interest there. And a lot of our work is in our homelands. We didn't ask to be where we're at right now. We have a direct interest in our ancestral lands. And I'm so glad that we have an opportunity to consult there and have a voice in those matters. And the ACHP has supported us, has supported our role. And that's where you're going to learn a lot. And you can learn from our podcast too.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Melissa, did you want to add anything to that before we wrap up for today?
So yeah, just to build on that, I want everyone to know there's already there are many laws and regulations and executive orders dealing that offer an opportunity for allyship. from the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, National Historic Preservation Act, the Executive Order on Native American Sacred Sites, a Tribal Consultation Executive Order. The two laws that were specifically mentioned, Advancing Tribal Parity on Public Lands Act, that from what I've been able to tell, if it's passed, I don't know that it has been passed yet, would require tribal consultation and could prohibit prohibit federal agents from selling lands that contain Native American sacred sites and cultural resources. And then the other act would help with increasing the Historic Preservation Fund. And that's the fund, the grants that TIPO's offices and state historic preservation offices use to fund their offices. So that will improve, hopefully give tribes the opportunity to expand their capacity in their tribal historic preservation offices.
Thank you so much for that. And I know there's another question in the chat for Bruce, so I will connect you and to Bruce to follow up about that question. Yes, thank you everyone for attending today's session. I hope you got something out of it, and a very special thank you to today's presenters, Melissa, Amanda Grace, Sheila, and Bruce. Before we end for today, I ask that you quickly scan the QR code on the screen to take a very brief feedback survey about the webinar today. And I do want to mention too that early bird rates to register for the upcoming National Trails Workshop from November 2nd to 4th in Albuquerque, New Mexico, those rates will end on October 2nd. So please register to receive the best rates. The workshop will be 3 days of learning, collaboration, and networking amongst seasoned trails and tourism professionals, emerging leaders, and people who are interested in getting involved with trails in their communities and across the nation. I will provide a link in the follow-up email where you can learn more and register for the workshop event. And please feel free to reach out to our presenters for any additional comments or questions you have. And with that, please follow PNTS on social media to keep in touch with what we're doing. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cara.